done stuff. I did a poem a while ago at the end of the Brian Cox, the last tour we did, all about the passing of time. And only one person was furious with it and hated it and said you shouldn't do that poem because it reminded them of someone they'd lost. And I didn't feel happy that I'd made them upset, but at the same time I knew that I felt I was still doing the right thing. You know, sometimes it's a battle to kind of do those things. So I mentioned Barry. The final comedian that I mentioned tonight is Sean Locke, who obviously died very recently. I worked with Sean a few times. We weren't friends, but it was an absolute joy to ever work with him. And I wrote on a show with him once, and I just felt like such an idiot because he was so brilliant, and I just had nothing to offer, you know. And I remember very fondly that with Sean once, we did this terrible gig, I think at the end of the 90s. We went up to Edinburgh in December to play a temporary building. It was basically a geodesic dome that had been placed on an ice rink. And it was not a great gig. There was a level of jeopardy that ran throughout the gig with an expectation that the geodesic dome was about to fall in on everyone at any moment, right? So no one could really laugh, partly because the geodesic dome made an enormous amount of noise every time the wind blew, and secondly because people could see that some of it was falling apart. And afterwards, the promoter said, let's go to the pub. And then the more the promoter drank, the more he went on about how brilliant Margaret Thatcher was. And eventually the promoter went to the toilet and Sean and me ran away, giggling into the street. And then we went to a restaurant on the Royal Mile at 1:30 a.m, which looking back was a mistake because I, yet again, had a terrible attack of diarrhea the next morning. I shouldn't have eaten the food that was available at 1:30 a.m. And I remember just going, oh my God, I've got to fly back to London. Oh my God. Oh, and again, I took loads of Imodium. I was like, oh God, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me, right? And I got on the plane just thinking this is going to be the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to me. I've never felt more anxious than now. And I was like, oh God, oh God. And I sat down in my seat just terrified and just sweating. And then I turned round to see who was next to me, and it turned out I was sat next to Anne Widdecombe. And I didn't go again for 9 years. So I wrote this poem about thinking about some of those people. I initially wrote it when Tim died, but this is thinking about many people. It doesn't always have to be comedians, but about the fact that the older I get, the more I don't worry about telling people that I love their work and share and trying to be as positive with them as possible, right? And sometimes it's a battle with all of us when we have all those negative thoughts that are also fighting with us, sometimes negative thoughts that are towards other people, sometimes so much when we're fighting with ourselves. But this is where I will end tonight. Let me celebrate you now as you stand before me, while you can still hear the cheer. Don't let me wait until you're gone to be fond. Don't let fear of embarrassment stifle my delight. How that worry of impending shame leads us to talk about love, only when there can be no response. Derision is easy to dispense and a brickbat easier to receive, so often an acknowledgement of what our self-loathing knew already. We fumble and blush when praised or when praising, waiting to be caught out and rejected. I loved her art. I loved her mind. I loved their work. Past tense. It's hard not to fear the present. Hard to be present. Hard not to bend under a cynic's stare. But keep the volume of things unsaid, the regrets of silence, as thin as it can be. Let it take up little space on the shelf in your head. There's no need to be ashamed of joy, the giving or receiving of it. Avoid all that uselessness of that regret. Worry you've been overwhelming with your adoration, far more than fear you've crushed with the negative. And of course, all of this I said in my head as you walk by. Thank you. Here's to Linda Smith.